for the nerds. This is for the brainiacs. This what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back. You ain't gonna touch me. You not gonna do nothing. You are not above me. I bet you wish you was me. I know it. I know.
What is poppin', everybody? And welcome back to another special episode of the Only Friends podcast. Well, you know, it's me and my only friends, which includes, but is not limited to, Tortoise.
Think I got rid of it?
Think I
got rid of it?
I saw one of them.
Oh
my God,
flapping
that fucking bingo wing for everybody to see.
Bingo wings.
No, yeah. I saw one of the
What is that?
one of the halves of the
I did upper body
maracas
today.
X baby. It's like
Great.
over there in the bathroom. It's like broken.
What?
Hold on, give me
the
1
other
second.
one? I
Give me
know.
1 second.
I know. You gonna go get it? Yeah.
What who sent the golden retriever after the we know that there's a broken Morocco. What is happening right now?
Oh man.
Is it still golden retriever
Let him
behavior
cook.
when he's
No,
going
let
there
him cook.
independently
Let him
and
cook.
just doing whatever he wants?
Yeah.
he's good.
He wants to please. See? You know.
Cheers.
Total power.
Turtles in a half shell.
Total power. What is happening? Hunt, it's good to have you.
Hello.
It's nice to have an adult on the set.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Good to
Listen,
be
man,
here.
just because you lost your childlike sense of wonder doesn't mean we all have to.
Yeah. Shots fired.
I mean, he's not wrong.
I think I called you miserable.
He's not miserable. He's just decaying.
Decaying.
We're all decaying, buddy. I hate to break it to you. That's true, but you're just decaying at a faster rate. You know, your half-life is shorter. Yeah, that's how age works. You're very observant, young man. I'm happy for you and your youthful exuberance that will then you also didn't sound die. very happy when I found this little. Well, because you didn't find it. It just hasn't been thrown away yet. I found it. I will say I've always been surprised with how much I get wrong who Conrad's going to throw it to. You would make a great puppy.
Yo, they said on I think it was pretty sure it was the Bills game I was watching, and they said Josh Allen's nickname used to be Tortuga because he was super slow, but then he got fast.
Then he got fast?
I don't know. Apparently he was slow, and then they called him Tortuga, and now he's running all over the place.
Spite is a powerful motivator.
Yeah.
I feel like it's more likely that he was just, people called him it ironically, right? Like, because he's fast, so you name him after something slow.
You would think.
Well, that's what we did with Lamanna.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the ironic nickname. And this man comes out of the gates blazing.
Yeah,
right.
this guy's got a very, very good 60-meter sprint time.
Yeah, you know how many
I'll
times...
tell you what to do when you miss the flop, but that's later on.
Right, you know how many times he's been all in with aces in the first level of a tournament?
Probably ended badly for the opponents in those cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it just
they
reminds
folded.
me-
They lost the hand.
It reminds me of that guy in the main this year that like just got infinite in with kings and just got like stacked hand one.
Got wrecked.
Yeah.
Just
I would
hand
not
one
do
of the
that.
10K main. Just I'm starting to come around with it doesn't matter. If you have kings, roll with it, baby. I don't know, man.
Sometimes
Get some help.
Sometimes they just have aces.
You have too much money right now, though. That's what happens.
He is TMM.
I
just see like who's winning the main. And it's just like, what are we going to fold kings now? Like, it's a 9-day event. I get it.
300 big blinds.
Yeah, I get it. I
I
don't know,
I know
man.
you're used to having 1,000 big blinds, but for a lot of us, 300 big blinds is a lot.
I got to tell you, the way that I
Infinite.
see 300 big blinds going in cash, honestly, you know what they should do? They should just put the 7 deuce game on in the main event.
I would love
It would
that.
change everything.
I would love 7 deuce tournaments, like straddle tournaments, any kind of new weird tournaments you can make up.
I think you should be able to run it twice, but that's just me.
I think actually
That's
running
the
it
worst
twice.
kind of tournament.
It lasts for 7. Well, I guess it would last for 7 days.
What kind of
a 1-day tournament would turn into a 7-day tournament?
If you did a 7 deuce bounty in an MTT, what kind of incentive could you give? Big blind ante or big blind from everyone?
Yeah, I think a big blind.
Could you imagine if that's how you busted the tournament? You were down to 1 big blind and somebody won 7 deuce and you had to toss in your last
It's actually
chip?
pretty dope.
Honestly, that would be really fun. That would be fun. I would like that.
I mean, it's a huge price, right? You win if you're playing 8-handed. You win 8 bit. You win
Yeah.
7 bigs. That's what I'm trying to work out in my head, because gaining chips is worth less than losing, and you're forced to play a negative EV hand. In some situations, it's going to be worth more now, right? Because like there's some. Well, it would be interesting because like when you get short, 7 deuce would get Really
would
good.
get added to the rip range.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the call-off ranges would get super
Oh,
wide.
that's so dirty. Like you just have 12 big blinds. You're just like,
Yeah, you probably.
I can triple up here.
But
Yeah.
it's so nice when you get it through because now you, instead of having 14 and a half bigs, you have 21
You
and a half
literally
bigs.
doubled
Like,
without
it's amazing.
without showdown.
Yeah.
You get down to 5 bigs and get dealt 7 deuce, and you're like free rolling.
Imagine what the calling ranges would do now.
Yeah,
Now
exactly.
the calling range is widened too.
Well, I
So
wonder
it's
how
just
much you would jam versus
Well, sort of.
raise.
They're only risking the one big blind, or additionally one big blind, right? So, yeah, calling ranges would have to adjust,
right.
but the risk premium would be higher for the caller than the
right.
the shover.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty sick.
This is fun. I want this to happen now.
I'm here to make things happen, Hunt.
Well, you're the one who has a connect to Jack Effel.
Well, let's not.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true anymore.
That
Yeah.
bridge is burning as we
Oh,
speak.
okay, fair enough.
I think I'd be better off if he didn't know me. I did not do a great job of keeping that relationship on par.
You just have to cue the I'm sorry.
Sorry. Did you happen to see any of the chess stuff yesterday with Hans?
I did, yeah. I thought it was kind of silly, just to be like randomly targeting poker and saying, promoting poker to young people is bad or something. Like I didn't really see where it was coming from, other than from a perspective of this guy wants to find a reason to tear down the person who posted the video. It was Botez, right? So
yeah,
like it just seemed like it was coming from a place of this guy wants to have a reason to criticize this person, as opposed to this guy is saying something legitimate that be taken seriously.
yeah. I think the source obviously was very obvious, kind of drama baiting and doing it for engagement. But I thought the conversation that spurned off of it was interesting.
I didn't read any of that. I just saw the original post.
So obviously a lot of people then replied and responded or reposted it, whatever. Man, I can't believe I'm talking in X terms now.
No, just call it Twitter.
Reposted it.
Call it Twitter, and then eventually one day it will be Twitter again.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, because
Pray for Twitter.
Elon's really good at buckling the social pressure.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I saw like a lot of responses, and a few things surprised me. Like I quote tweeted one of his replies to Alex, I think, and it was kind of shocking that somebody who's obviously very intelligent to be as good at chess as he is, understands so little about simple concepts like risk reward and like the backbone of gambling and how it works. It sounded like the way that he worded the tweet kind of read similarly to somebody who is like baked into old world values, like derived from 17th century religion type of things.
Yeah.
Gambling is a sin.
Yeah, it was just like very antiquated and very strange to me that this somehow turned into an ethical / moral dilemma. And I think that like there's just like this great misunderstanding of what the difference between those two things even are. Like ethics is a set of rules and, basically just like a way to measure fairness, right? Like, are you abiding by the letter of the law, and is the letter of the law fair, et cetera, et cetera. Morals are more going to be individualized and
Line draws.
yeah, like where you draw a line in the sand in the gray area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, we can explore gambling through the moral lens, but societally, like we just pretty much are good and accept these things as like being relatively okay. And you don't have to go that far to see it. Like obviously we've seen sports betting is getting legalized everywhere, and we understand that it's $1 billion industry and all this other stuff. But beyond that, like just look at something like day trading. Like the majority of recreational money in day trading is for sure getting crushed.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trading the market, right? But like we all grow up in our education system being told that the market is the most reliable investment that you'll ever make, that you should make your money work for you as you start to accrue wealth and stuff like that. And it leads to this notion that like you as a non-professional can just pick a stock and ride it home to victory.
right?
Yeah, or
Which is
100x leverage trades, these shit coins.
right. Yeah, then you can start to
Or
talk
it's just
about
pure gambling.
right, and that's the irony is that like people will make the distinction that somehow the traditional S&P stock market is totally safe and not a gamble. But like if you trade within cryptocurrencies, then you're just a degenerate.
Mm-hmm.
And all you're talking about is regulation, right? So like we're drawing the line now in the moral realm between if something is regulated or not.
Yeah, you can find some very, very high risk penny stocks, right? And gamble it up as much as you want, right? Just like you can find some shit coin that's has a very low market cap, and you just hope to bank. But
Right,
like, it's gambling the same way.
Right, and so like when you start to talk about advertising to kids, what was your first exposure to the stock market?
Mine,
Yeah,
it was in probably in high school, or
8th grade civics class.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
For
Mine was
sure.
middle school.
Yeah, for sure. It was 8th grade civics class.
It was
Right?
like financial
But
literacy.
for a time, it was kind of like that's what you did. You put your money in the stock market and let it grow. Right?
I remember seeing a book where it's like, if you made $1 million and you put it in a bank, you can live off of that for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
I remember
there was a time where that was the case,
1950 or something.
right? No, I mean even in like the 70s and 80s when interest rates were super high. I mean, if you had $1 million and you were getting 8% interest, like you just have $80K a year, which is plenty of money to live off.
Right,
of.
and it
Like,
compounds.
right, exactly.
year.
So it's just like but I mean we're not living in those times now.
I think there's also this weird thing where when it comes to gambling, as in gambling for money, there's this sense that it's like this, I mean, the word degenerate always gets used, right? But like no one ever talks about the same thing when it comes to like gambling with your physical safety or something, right? Like if someone's like really into like doing extreme sports, you don't look at that person and the risk that they're taking in the same way that you would look at the risk taken on by someone who's really into gambling for money. But gambling with something that can actually kill you is like more dangerous than gambling.
Yeah, I
with
think
something
Landon
that
was
could cost you
making
a
that
couple
point
bucks,
yesterday.
you know?
Right.
Yeah, I think just in many instances in different forms of life, we're always gambling. It's just a matter of how you view it.
Every time you step into a car, you're
I think
taking an inherent risk.
I think kind of the problem is the term gamble has been so stigmatized, where it's like really all we're doing is we're creating a word that identifies when there is risk with variance attached, and that's going to be most things in life. So like this whole notion that it's immoral or unethical to in any capacity promote this type of stuff is really like trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. I think that at its true core, we're just looking at a situation where people are going to do whatever they want to do, and there's a hyper fixation on the outlier extreme cases where somebody goes from being a stable individual and runs themselves into ruin and becomes homeless because they had a gambling addiction. Like that's not the average use case. The average use case is certainly losing when they gamble. We can all agree with that.
Yeah.
However, they weed themselves out of the community before like true ruin is reached. And you can say like, oh, I can name 100 guys that are lurking around the poker room and looking for their next buy-in and yada 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 and all this other stuff. It's like, sure, but they're not homeless. They're not dying. They're just living a life that you don't deem to be desirable. But that's true in almost all realms, right? Like that same type of person is doing the same thing, working a 9 to 5 and looking for, a little extra change to get cigarettes or to go get drunk.
I hate to bring it up, but I really do hate to bring it up, but here we are. Didn't Annie Duke write a book about like thinking in terms of bets?
Yeah.
That's, like
that's kind of
her
the
whole thing now. She's like a public speaker or something.
It was so sharp.
about risking.
Any competent poker player could have done it.
She was first.
And she was just first, and she's going to make 8 figures off of it lifetime.
And regardless of the whole like epic poker league, this, that, whatever, like the idea of thinking about the decisions you make in terms of wits and wagers is an extremely important life skill to have. Because most times when we do things, we don't even think about it.
Yeah.
At least not in like an actual. The first time I started thinking about stuff in that regard was like when you had me think about cost benefit analysis. Like genuinely think of like, okay, what are the pros? What are the cons? Most of the time, you just fucking do shit. You don't even think about it.
Of course. And like the notion that it's going to spiral out of control and you're going to lose everything, quote unquote, it's more of an extreme take than the reality actually replicates.
It's like the fear mongering.
Right. It's like if 1 million people are playing poker for real money, you're not going to see 100,000 of them. It's very unlikely that you'll see 100,000 of them run themselves into complete and utter ruin.
Right.
But you might see 10,000 of them do that. So now you're hyper fixated on 1%.
Yeah, you're looking at the specific examples that fit your narrative.
Sure. And the other thing is like even if there is 1% or whatever the percentage is that truly runs themselves into ruin, what's the likelihood that they stay in ruin? Right? Like how many of that now subset are just destitute for life? Yeah. Again, it's only going to be a fraction of it, right?
Yeah.
And most of the time, those are people that no matter what path they took, they have some certain self-destructive behavior that allows them to ultimately, reach ruin faster and live in a way that isn't desirable to you or I. But the notion that like we need to protect the children from this, to me, seems so ridiculous. Like
it's reductive.
I was 4 when I saw my first alcohol commercial. What are we talking about? Mm-hmm. It's like we've made. You're somehow gonna like group.
What's up?
Yeah, like these commercials are geared towards kids, right?
Yeah.
The pop
we used
culture.
To have candy cigarettes. Remember those gum
course.
cigarettes where you could actually blow
the cigars?
Like,
Yeah, and if we want to start talking about stuff that's dangerous for kids, like talk about the effect that technology has on people's brains and stuff. Like talk about the fact that kids' brains are actually different now than what they used to be because they use technology in different ways. Like let's talk about some serious stuff instead of just stuff that's just pulled out of nowhere.
Yeah, I just think it's like incredibly reductive and bordering on silly to somehow like go into the realm of, or the shadow realm, if you will, of like
I love the shadow realm.
The nefarious activities that are available and somehow truly believe that like, oh, we're protecting the kids because we don't talk to them about games that they can bet on. But meanwhile, we're running like a bunch of, alcohol commercials with girls with huge boobs and bikinis and, cartoons and all this other stuff that like kids are naturally going to gravitate towards and teens are naturally going to gravitate towards. And then just be like, oh, but that's societally acceptable. Everybody gets drunk.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
There's also this weird thing where whatever you tell kids that they're not allowed to do or not allowed to have or not supposed to see, is what they're going to seek out.
Of course.
And there's never going to be some future world in which kids just change and they stop seeking that stuff out. So the more you start to put things in this category of like, this is not for kids, this is not for kids, that's not for kids, those become the things that kids want. So there has to be an equilibrium eventually where like you have some of those things to try to reduce the exposure of kids to those things. But you also eventually have to say, well, at some point, like we're actually attracting kids towards this thing and causing them to seek it out more by telling them it's off limits,
Yeah, the world at large is a scary place, and like generally being the protective one who shelters everybody is not the effective way of preventing them from what ails them in society, right? It's educating them on it. It's if they see a commercial for BetMGM and sports betting, you educate them on like what the actual true odds are. Like that's an opportunity to have them think probabilistically.
And you tell your wife that you're going to do it.
Yes, you do.
As we determined from yesterday's Am I the Asshole? But more importantly, I think it's important to like equate it to more traditional realms as well. Like I keep making the stock market example, but for everybody who says that there are thousands of poker players who gamble themselves into
destitution.
ruin and they just like can't recover or whatever. Look at all of the people who trade recreationally. How many of them do you think traded themselves into ruin?
Yeah,
right.
And I would wager. I would like to bet on this.
I would like to bet on
that poker players in general are much better investors than in when it comes to like traditional finance than just your average person.
Yeah,
Because they
maybe.
understand the risk. They understand. I mean,
Well, maybe, but the point I'm trying to make is that nobody is saying that the stock market is. Nobody's demonizing the stock market.
Correct.
No,
and
right,
saying
of
that there
course
are
not.
hundreds of thousands of people who
course
ruin
not.
themselves year
Right.
over year.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would think that the crossover of like the percentage of people who trade recreationally to the percentage of people who play poker recreationally that reach ruin is probably pretty close to the
It's
same.
like let's like angels and demons, where people use gambling as like slot machine negative EV stuff with fixed negative ROI.
Right.
And you look at a stock market like positive ROI, like year over year, you're gonna get some money back and you're gonna make money. But if you do this, you're going to crash and burn and become the worst version of yourself you can ever imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why it reminds me of this, but do you remember the Saved by the Bell episode where Jessie gets addicted to caffeine pills? And she like starts breaking down like
I think I do. Yeah, but
so. Well,
I don't for sure.
It just reminds me of that scene because it was so overly dramatized
so, yeah,
to hammer the point home of like how dangerous drugs are.
right.
Right.
And in this instance, drugs were over-the-counter caffeine pills.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like the most benign version of what drugs could possibly be.
Because they couldn't feature an actual drug in an episode, I would assume.
Well,
Like,
no,
had to
they
make it like
did an
caffeine
episode
pills.
on marijuana
Oh,
also.
they actually did. Okay.
Well, caffeine is standard now, right? And like no one really thinks, oh, if you call it too much caffeine,
Well, if
you're
you
going to
abuse
become
it,
a
it's
demon.
still-
It was more using that as the vehicle to represent addiction, right? So it was a 30-minute episode of her spiraling out of control and starting with like, oh, I take these to study a little bit. You know what I mean? Like the way we view Adderall now.
Right.
And then like each scene, she would progressively get worse and worse and more like demonic.
So she was
and-
a full-blown heroin
yeah,
addict.
and like she's just screaming at people, you
Yeah.
know, and she's like off her rocker and needs
Yeah.
her pills.
Right.
And you know, we're talking about like caffeine.
All it's going to do is keep you awake. It's not going to make you fucking yell at people.
Right,
What
right.
the
So
hell?
it's just like it's this overly dramatized movie scene of what the dark
Yeah.
corners of the world can be if you take them to the extremes. But the people that take things to the extremes are a very low percentage of society always.
And
It's like,
they're-
yeah, it sucks if that's your kid.
yeah, they're gonna stay like that's always gonna be the case in some regards. You know, the people that have the hyper addictive esque, they're gonna find something to be addicted to.
Right.
You know, like in my case, like I think prior, and I don't think it ever call it fully goes away, but when it comes to curbing your addictive personality esque, I played poker for 2 straight years and didn't leave my room.
Yeah.
Like,
Kids
it was-
do that all the time with video games too.
Yeah, I did that in high school. Like I played
Right.
video games my entire high school career, and then found poker. Where now it's like, yes, I understand now. I have these addictive parts about me, but it's like, okay, how do I actually control them versus taking it all the way to the other way? But I'm not call it the normal case of someone that doesn't end up growing out of it.
Yeah, I think just preaching abstinence from like all things is
Right, like don't do them
crazy-
because they could fuck you up.
it's just a crazy approach.
Right. And it's also the whole, like, when somebody think of the children thing is like 99% of the time it's just totally disingenuous, and it's never used as like a legitimate thing, because the stuff that actually affects kids is most of the time completely disconnected from the stuff that people actually want to tell you is what's affecting kids.
Yeah.
I will say, like, there's definitely though a point of trying to potentially, the way that we market and sell the dream of poker prior of rags to riches story, which leaves a lot of rags in the wake.
Yeah, I mean, you and I've talked about this a lot where like I'm always the old man naysayer who's just like, "Hey guys, the dream is we know it is dead."
I mean, we made a whole documentary on it.
Right. Right. And it's
Go
like
check out To Be Determined.
And I'm
if you
not
haven't seen
saying
it.
that to be somebody to like poo-poo the industry
No,
or anything
right.
like that. It's just, you know, let's be realistic about it. The like what success looks like in this industry has largely changed. You're not going to
Not
get
gonna make
signed
millions a
to $1
year.
million. You're not going to be Daniel Negreanu. Like that era is gone. And it's probably not very likely to come back. We're not going to see that level of investment from corporations that can build characters up through multi-million-dollar deals and marketing. So it's like, be a lot more realistic. Like, you can make a good hourly if you get good at this game, and that's just fine. But like, yeah, you're not going to be you're not going to be a world-class athlete when it comes to pay grade, when it comes to notoriety, when it comes to outside success or the ability to branch there off of.
And you can make greater than $50 an hour, right, Guapo?
That's right. That's the dream.
Well, in order to make more than $50 an hour, you need to know what to do when you miss a flop.
Good
There it
segue.
is.
Thank you.
High quality segue.
So we are going to get into today's Strat Chat, and we're going to talk a lot about cbet strategies as a whole, but most specifically, like the biggest pain point, I think, for people who are kind of just developing flop strategies to begin with, and that's, what do I do when I miss?
Get addicted to backdoors.
That's a really strong point, I think. From my perspective, having kind of felt every point of pain that this game has to offer, I think this might be a weird place to start, but I think the best place to start is actually the low SPR scenarios where you've already invested a lot. And I'm speaking for the audience a little bit here, but that notion of feeling committed, right? Feeling some level of pot commitment, feeling some level of attachment to winning the hand because a lot of money's already gone in. So like I'm specifically talking about like starting at 4-bet pots, perhaps, where your range is incredibly narrow and you have a good hand, right? Like it's rare that you're going to play a 4-bet pot, especially as the 4-better, where you're just going to have a hand like 7 high and be like, oh, I can just like dump this, like, yeah, when you're deep, maybe there's a little sprinkle of that in there, but it's mostly going to be like, I have ace queen suited and I missed. I have ace king off and I missed, right? And that sinking feeling of like, well, I didn't accomplish what I wanted to which is mostly to either get the money in or win the pot now. And now I have to navigate this 2 SPR spot where it came 9 high and I have big cards.
Right. In the hand ranking scale in your brain, you have nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you truly are at your bottom, right? So personally, like emotionally, that feels bad, man.
Cock suck fuck.
Right. Right. And I think that it takes a well-developed strategy to start to understand how to navigate these situations. And I want to present this scenario first because I think it simplifies the concept a lot for the audience. Ranges are really narrow, so we can really hone in on specific segments. The SPR is relatively low, so we can just like basically focus on a single betting strategy, which is largely going to be geo sizing. And then on top of that, we can begin to understand how critical it is to give up or not.
Love geometric sizing.
Whenever you're talking about having a very small portion of bottom of range, right?
Right.
The inverse of that is we can just talk about how important it is to realize your equity and be willing to stack off. And that's something I think people are generally uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Like, call it specific example, but one that happens a bit. The Jack 10X flush draw boards, you play very fast and you realize. The low wheel boards, for example, and other boards, it's like, oh shit, you actually get to play some all-ins and realize you're equity with high cards. So it's trying to figure out, okay, even though I missed, how good is my hand at, I don't want to use the word blocker, right? Because the whole blocker conversation is different. But when you do have ace king and you look at the top of your opponent's range, you say, okay, they're going to play aces and kings very fast in most cases. How does my hand interact with them actually having value? Because the most important part when it comes to floating and being able to win pots later is thinking about how do my cards interact with the worst and best of theirs. So you have, even though you miss a flop in position, like being addicted to backdoors and seeing a price, sometimes you can float, other times you can't. It's just a matter of what price are you being laid and are you willing to gamble that they check.
Gamble. Callback.
So from your perspective, Hunt, what is the approach? Like, what's the simplified approach to c-betting if we're talking about low SPR situations where ranges are relatively tight?
I think the first thing I would probably just kind of add on to what you guys said is to get out of the binary approach to evaluating a situation. So to get out of looking at it as I hit or I missed, right? Because that is
I
just...
hear that so much.
What's that?
I hear that so much that I missed.
Right. Yeah. Like the problematic aspect of that is it's going to take you down a pathway where you're thinking that way for the whole rest of the hand. You're thinking about like ace king, like, oh, I missed, therefore this is a bluff, therefore I'm going to just try to brute force my way into bluffing this off for 3 streets. Or, you know, if you didn't quote unquote miss, like you make a pair, now you're going to convince yourself that, well, now this is a hand that I have to play like value. But the reality is everything is on a spectrum, and not everything is just easily value or easily bluff on the flop, especially. So I think that particularly at the low SPR spots where everything's going to be getting a good price, is you have to start teaching yourself to visualize, or not necessarily even visualize, but to see the game as equity, to see the game as a spectrum of equity, to understand, let's say when you do have ace king on some low card board, even in a 4-bet pot, it's pretty likely that most of the time you have 6 outs, which means that you have probably at least 24, 25% equity there. Plus, sometimes you have the best hand already. So your equity is probably in the 25 to 30% region, possibly even more than that, depending on exactly what your opponent's range looks like. But to just understand that, and to even be able to immediately, even if you get your equity wrong, like the difference between saying, I probably have like 30% equity versus I missed is huge in terms of how it affects the way you're going to think about the hand going forward.
Especially when it comes to playing into bias, where someone will be like, okay, I missed with ace king, I'm checking down, I'm not trying to win this hand anymore.
Right.
And then you're looking at the game through a hand versus I don't even know or care what my opponent has, versus a broad scoped range versus range. Where even if you miss a flop with, call it, you 4-bet ace queen and the board comes king high, in the normal mind, it's like, I missed with ace queen, I tried bluffing to win pre-flop, it didn't work. Versus, oh, this is really great for my range and not great for them. I can play range bet and not worry about my specific hand. So now you're looking at it from a range versus range analysis, and then you can come up with global strategies to still try to win hands and play a range and hands within it more effectively, even when you miss.
I think from a training perspective, the most productive thing that someone can do to get themselves out of that binary mindset is to practice not focusing in on your whole cards. So like if you're someone who likes reviewing hands, for example, review somebody else's hand and don't allow yourself to know what they actually had. Like find a hand in your poker tracker database or something and like erase your whole cards so you can't see your whole cards, and then force yourself to think through the spot, think about what your range looks like, what your strategy looks like, and take yourself away from being able to think about your whole cards. Because the more you think about your individual whole cards, the further away you're going to get from a strategy that's actually well-rounded. And you're just going to be thinking about, like, how do I win this pot right now? How do I do something right now that's going to increase my chances of a good outcome?
Funny enough, I feel like that happens a lot in poker when it comes to trying to win hands. Is the true sense, like a gamble aspect, is looking at your hand and saying, what could I have done differently to get the result that I want? Whereas sometimes you 4-bet a hand that's a pure 4-bet, you get bad board for range, and you check fold, because that's like the fiscally, strategically responsible thing to do. But then you say, oh, I could have aces and he can't. I'm going to rifle it off. And it's like, whoa, this is actually the issue versus seeing the game as a whole.
Yeah.
In the strategy sense.
It's so common in tournaments too. Like I can't tell you how many times I've had people, like a student, text me a hand where it's like, I busted the tournament on this hand. Could I have done something differently? Right? It's like the standard thing.
Just preservation.
Yeah, and it'll get to the point where it's like, I had kings. Can I ever get away from it? And I'm just like, just spend your time on something more valuable, because rewriting history in that way, trying to like find a way that I could have gotten away from it, is just attaching to what actually happened and trying to think of something that can stop it from happening to you again.
Yeah, it's just the negative feedback loop of poker, where we all kind of want to make ourselves feel good and say, how can I play every spot perfect?
Right.
How can I, but perfect isn't from a strategy sense. Perfect is from a personal result sense.
Yeah.
Because everyone that's trying to play a hand, in most cases, tries to win the hand.
Right.
But sometimes winning the hand is just check folding.
Right. And you're trying to, like, when you're doing this, when you're looking back at a hand that you've lost and trying to rewrite it, you're trying to protect yourself from how it felt to lose that hand. What you're actually doing is you're looking at, I busted this tournament with kings, it sucked, and I don't want that to happen again. How can I try to find some way of playing differently so that that doesn't happen? But if you're trying to protect yourself from that outcome, you're going to lead yourself further and further away from making the right decisions, because those outcomes of I had kings and I got it in against aces and busted, like that's just supposed to happen. Like there's no world in which you can be a winning poker player and protect yourself from getting it in bad and sometimes just losing.
I think an issue that most people suffer from is that bleeds off, like that concept of risk management, if you will, or attempting to lose the minimum. It bleeds into the strategy aspect of when you are not at top of range, right? So like if you're already thinking about that way when you're at top of range of how could I prevent coolers from happening?
What if he has a set?
Yeah, that type of stuff. Then it really bleeds into, well, I missed, therefore I have no equity, right? Like I think that there's a conflation between what your equity is and missing. Right, this notion that like, oh, I have ace king high on a 7 high board in a 4-bet pot, I can't win because I have 0 equity now is very, very incorrect.
Yeah,
and it really comes as a lack of understanding what the rest of your range looks like. Right, if you're in a 4-bet scenario and you know that your range is kings, aces, ace king, and then like maybe some ace 5 suited as bluffs, what you'd recognize is that on these 7 high textures, you're at a pretty big advantage. Your opponent's unlikely to have aces and kings in range. And, you know, even though when you have ace 5 and ace king, you're relatively at bottom, you have such a big equity advantage throughout all the combinations of hands that have seen this flop that you just get to bet freely because there's nothing your opposition can really do outside of just call you down. And that's really the nature of the game. Whenever you find yourself in these tight range spots where you have advantage, you're the uncapped range, and your entire mission is to just make it uncomfortable for your opponent's capped range to call.
Yep. There's like just in any game, there's offense, defense. You know, and when you have the uncapped range, you're playing offense. When you have the capped range, you're playing defense.
Right, and I think people misunderstand that offense is making money by having value hands. Like, yes, of course that's true, but that money is only being made because you also have an equal amount of hands that are bluffing and or just trying to realize their equity, right? Like I played a hand versus Robl on Bally's Live. We were playing 200, 400. I open ace king under the gun. He 3-bets middle position. I 4-bet. He calls. We were deep, so we arrived at an SPR on the flop of like 5, and it came 7 high, I think, like 7-4-4, something like that. Just a very advantageous board to me as the 4-better. And I just 3-E'd, like with ace king. I just know that like this is the hand that I'm going to, at a minimum, bet. And I may just bet jam.
You might even make a pair at some point.
Well, that's what happened. The turn's a king. I continue to 2-E now on the turn. He calls again. The river's a brick, and I jam. And you know, he kind of was like struggling to figure out what my range was through this bet line because I don't think he expected it. Most of my range isn't going to take that line, right? Like queens are going to feel uncomfortable bet jamming. However, it's not an unreasonable thing, right? The unreasonable aspect of bet jamming queens on 7-4-4 king deuce is that
positions were
under the gun versus low jack.
Sure, but that's different than button big blind.
Yeah. My point is the difficulty of going bet jam with queens on a 7-7 or 7-4-4 king deuce board is that you stop being able to see what calls. Right? So
sure,
if you can't get called by worse.
Tens, jacks.
Yeah, and like those hands are very unhappy.
Yes.
And some pairs have to start folding. So it's like the more the target to get called by shrinks, the less thinly you can jam for value, right? But ace king is a layup, right? Because it's still the same cluster of hands that have to call off, queens, jacks, tens, and they're very unhappy to do so. And he ultimately arrived at a river fold with jacks, but he thought about it for a really long time. So it was clear he was indifferent.
And if you have ace queen off, you're just going to do the same thing.
Yeah. Right? Like whatever the next worst hand, I mean, on that texture, it's probably going to be ace queen.
Yeah, well, you just block, because now when you're going through the aggressive node, you're trying to have them be at the capped portion of their range as much as you can. right? So you have ace queen with good suits, you block king queen suited, you block the ace king trap that he's going to have if he's not going to pile it on you, low jack
Correct.
versus
Yeah, we're way too deep for it to be all in.
Exactly. So now you're worried about, okay, how can I make it more likely he has jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s? And sometimes if he's playing good poker, which he does, he's going to have a 4 in his hand for trips, like the 4-5 suited, he'll have like an ace 4 suited.
Sure.
And like if that's the case, that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
I would never like replay this hand where I get snapped on the river and he shows me aces. I'd be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I should have just check folded the flop.
Yeah.
It's like,
or like
no,
he has
you
a
shouldn't.
4 and you think to yourself like, why would I do that? I know you're only calling with trips there.
right.
And it's like, you have no idea.
It's just very insulting to your opposition in both ways.
Disrespectful.
Well, it's disrespectful in both ways in the sense that versus good players, it's disrespecting that they could ever call you with appropriate bluff catchers. Right. And then against bad players, it's disrespectful that they could ever make like a hero call with fucking ace high or pocket 8s or pocket 9s, something like that, which happens all the time.
Right. Or like in some regard, having ace king for Robl in the turns of queen is kind of better than jacks, right? Because now he's blocking your top end polar range. So now you're worried about, okay, I actually have a hand that, even though it's nothing and missed, does very good at making sure you missed more likely than not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. And, you know, again, like he's only even considering jacks on the end because he knows I'm capable of having bluffs.
Yeah.
So if I'm not willing to rifle it off here with ace queen, then jacks becomes a very easy fold. It's trivial.
Yeah.
I just have aces and kings and ace king, and that's it.
It's just the action reaction game, right? Because at some point, in theory, if you know they're folding jacks and 10s too much, you start over bluffing.
Right.
And if they call too much, you start under bluffing. So now you have to kind of figure out, okay, where do I think my opponent is on the line of good? And you saying, oh, you think Andrew Robl is going to fold too much is just the most disrespectful thing in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I'm just going to play good.
Yeah.
And I expect you to play good.
Right, you just have to. So I think that like when we're talking about like what do you do when you miss the flop, it's well, you have a plan, right? And the plan is derived from what your range would want to do. Yeah. So on certain boards when you miss, your entire range is going to want to not give up but check, right?
Play check raises, defend.
There's a difference between giving up and checking as well, right? Like some hands will be give ups, but it's unlikely to be really strong hands that didn't connect, right? Like oftentimes ace king can see a turn even through the check call line,
right,
on a 7-4-3 board.
Yeah, and in most cases too, the bet size that you're going to theoretically face from your opponent is one that they want to keep you in with those hands because they don't want to reduce your range so much to only needing to continue with your protects. Or let's say you have the low board and you have a range check, where there's some 4-bet pots where that's going to be the case. Now, if they go too big, they're saying, okay, you can fold everything that's not really good hands. And when you have really good hands, you're going to make money. And then when you have nothing, you're going to fold and I'm going to win. And that, for an in-position player, is what they're trying to accomplish when you're looking at the game of, I want to win this hand now. There's so much money invested.
You get everything that's worse to fold and everything that's better to continue.
Right. It's just it's a reverse value bet.
To be in.
Yeah. And so most of the time when you see bet sizes from in position, you're going to see small bets to make you continue wider. So now you have to float the ace king, because if you don't, you're giving up and folding away too much equity. And that's why you see a lot of times in position, you're going to play smaller stab sizes facing checks.
Right.
And sure, sometimes in poker there's different, like called higher SPR spots, and you always have to figure out how can my range get in all of the money, yes or no? And if the answer is yes, you figure out how to do it in an appropriate sizing scheme. Where you're playing a 4-bet pot with a small SPR, it's not that hard to be all in.
Yeah.
You can always just check down to river and then 2x pot it.
Yeah.
In a single raise pot, you can't check down and go 30x pot.
Right. I mean, you could.
You could, but you probably put a c-bet in somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
And you go 15x on the river.
Yeah, unless you go like ace king on like the queen jack x, river 10, all in.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the Tortoise does when he finds himself
what
out of position
do?
with king queen high on a 8-high board.
I played a hand. This is a little. I mean, I guess it's a little slightly.
What about in king queen high?
Guy raised under the gun. We're playing 1-2, and he makes it 12. And I didn't play with him a lot, not a lot, but he seemed to be a more of the active player,
sure,
compared to the pool.
Sure.
Okay. So he's opening a lot. He's opening relatively big. He makes it 12, one caller. Around the me in this big blind, I have ace king off. I like to 3-bet, which I think I can flat there a lot.
Nah.
No. Okay, good.
Way too much money in the
against
middle.
a
That's okay. That's what
Against a 6x and a call, especially in a 1-2
all right,
game
cool.
with
Because
high
that's what I
rate,
was thinking. Yeah.
You should
so
have
that was me
almost
going
no
back. I'm
flats
like, maybe
there.
I should just flatten this. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Right.
Honestly, you could be all in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
we
like,
don't even
what is
know
it,
how deep
200,
was, but
300?
we're all in.
I made it 52. We're 300 effective.
Mm-hmm.
So 150 big blinds effective. And he calls, and the other guy folds.
Okay.
There's like 120 in the middle. I have 200 back.
Yeah, so it's even less than a 4-bet pot, SPR wise.
Yeah.
Flop comes queen. Let's see. Queen, jack, deuce, queen, deuce of hearts. And I have ace, king, ace of hearts, king of clubs.
Okay.
So I have cut shot, backdoor.
Yep.
I go third pot. He calls. And my plan was to jam a lot of hearts. I probably jam a 10. I mean, at that point, I'm like, yeah, it's like one SPR on.
Yeah, I think the problem is when you go third pot, you don't have turn jams.
Yeah, maybe not.
Depends, because like normally when you turn jam here, it's gonna be a very small percentage of your range that needs to jam for protection.
Right.
Like you have aces, no heart, you're gonna be all in.
Yeah.
If he has a flush, he has a flush.
Yeah, agreed. But
So-
I think the cleaner way of going about this is half potting flop and then just jamming turn.
On all of them.
Well, on a lot of them, like on bricks and on cards that you approve on.
Just basically going 2E flop.
Yeah.
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 Okay. It's like half pot, half pot.
Yeah, I mean, you're just so high up in your equity distribution, and you're not gonna. If you have ace 5 suited here, you're not gonna be able to run this line.
All right. It felt
Right.
like
So ace king's kind of the
it
bluff.
felt like oh well, this is just a small bet, but
Well,
But
I mean,
like-
you're targeting the
yeah.
middle pairs with a small bet,
Yeah,
which does very well.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Like,
That's true.
I think I like
He might just have
going
threes.
really small there. I think
You-
I like going like 20%, 50%.
It just has
something like
deuces
that.
through tens.
Right. 'Cause
Right.
There's so many pocket pairs that you're kind of targeting, and then everything outside of that, everything that has broadways, flush draws, gut shots, etc., a queen, a jack, you can't target that because it's never going to fold to any size.
I think this is a huge point, like targeting. Like
Yeah.
you're just saying, okay, what can I actually make really upset?
Mhm.
yeah.
Right? Because now if he has like call it nines with a heart
Mhm.
facing quarter pot or B20, it's like, oh shit, like this is really kind of annoying because I
Right.
can still maybe make a flush or still turn a 10 and make it backdoor straight.
Yeah.
Where if you go big bet, it's like, whoa,
Well,
like I can just fold now.
There's a bit of an issue though in that you guys are talking about it from the bluff lens, and that's very reasonable because that's what we have here. But we would then, by proxy of they're not going to fold a queen, they're not going to fold a jack, choose a different line with our value to ensure that we were all in.
Well, no, I
it's
think
okay.
we're just looking at it, or I'm looking at it from the perspective of doing that with value as well. I'm not saying I would do something different when I have kings. or
Yeah,
whatever
I'm
here.
just saying I think it's harder to be all in.
Well, I think I would play differently versus call it opponent structure where I think that they
Like-
don't care about
Like
my
if you have
range.
black kings, this
Oh, that
isn't
big.
this is not the best path to being all in.
Of course not.
Right.
But this is from an exploit. We're talking about, okay, in theory, I think the best path to being all in is going quarter and being okay and living with it. But in practice, the better choice is 2E all in.
Yeah.
Like if I was playing someone good, I would not play this line this way.
Fair.
I would just play range B20.
Yeah.
I play like call it smaller stakes live. Say, okay, I don't think he's gonna fold the queen. I don't think he's gonna fold the jack, and he's gonna fold those pairs anyways. If I B20, it makes more sense to go big hand, big bet because my hand needs more protection and value.
Yeah. I mean, from when I mentioned targeting, I was talking about targeting for indifference, not targeting for folds. Like because
Right.
like Landon said, the nines with a heart or whatever, if we bet a size that's small enough, that hand is going to be indifferent here as opposed to just being a fold. Whereas if we bet 1/3, nines with a heart now probably just becomes pure fold.
Right. You're allowing your opponents to make money with their decisions if they can find the correct ones. And if we lead them into folding where they want to fold anyways when they miss, the way we make money from that is forcing them to continue versus the price you lay instead of giving them the outs to fold.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I agree with everything you're saying if positions are flipped. I think the tricky dilemma here is forcing yourself to now navigate a 3-street game out of position whereas you could easily reduce it to a 2-street game with the majority of your range.
I think that would be something I would be more concerned about if it was a spot where the top of our range was more vulnerable. So if it's a board like, maybe if it's like 9-8x, something like that, where jacks, queens, kings are vulnerable against overcards, etc., I would be more looking at condensing the number of streets we play. But I feel like aces, kings are still going to have enough equity on queen, jack, x that I don't think it quite falls into that category. There's still a bunch of runouts where aces and kings are going to.
Well, it's like, let's just say that Brian has queens here. Like, you're not going to go half pot. You block the queens, and it's more likely they have the middle pairs.
Yeah.
So in my, like, the way that I see this spot is,
Just
okay,
going small.
I'm just going to go small with the hands that I want to go small with. Like, let's say I have the bluffs, and then when I have the value hands that need the most protection, and I'm not worried about if they turn a flush on me, I'm just going to go 2E all in.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that ace king complements that range better, and ace 5 complements the small range better, the small sizing better, because ace 5 doesn't need to play a 3-street game.
Well, just
it just benefits immediately from the indifference point of the small size.
Right. I think
like you should still have something that is nothing in your bigger sizing.
You should, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like you're skipping a lot of steps here.
We flipped around. Like now you're talking theoretically and he's talking exploitatively.
Well, because I think like it's important to not skip the steps, right? Like if we're being presented with a blank question of like, I missed, I don't know what to do. The notion that like we should just skip to exploits is fucking insane.
Sure. I also think that playing 2 sizes is insane.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So I would play 1 size of range bet B20.
Yeah, I would do the opposite.
You would play checks and play half?
I would play checks in half, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just trying to target indifference from the pairs.
Yeah.
But it depends on how much you bluff. It depends on how much you're squeezing ace 5 in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, for those sizes, you should be pretty aggressive out of the big blind, I think.
It all gets really weird when you're 300 deep and the open is 6x, because like you probably can't just rip pre-flop with a lot of hands. Like, it gets very strange.
You should be, and I think practically, I mean, as I'm sure you've seen, you've never seen somebody jam 300 over raise call.
Yeah.
Because player pool doesn't want to do that. It's scary.
I actually did that. I had lost the answer. I was down. I think I had like 220, and it went like open to 15 call, and I had 10s in the small blind. I just ripped.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Because that's the problem with opening too big.
I got called by a smaller pair. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Right, because he thought he's like, oh, I just thought you had ace king.
Right, the Tortoise got some action.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't know.
In this hand, he calls the turn, and
calls me the flop.
It calls the flop, and the turn is a 9 of spades, putting 2 spades out there. So 2 hearts, 2 spades. I didn't like that card.
No, you did not.
I did not like that card.
I think this becomes this happens a lot.
Right.
This is going to happen a lot in this spot with this hand. And like we don't care about that card that much if we're set up for a half pot jam.
Yeah. Okay. So
anyway, that's not necessarily advocating for my strategy more.
Right.
But it's just now you have a much tougher decision at 1 SPR.
Right. Exactly. So
I don't think we care about that card that much one way or the other. I feel like it just doesn't do much other than, you know, we blocked King 10 already, but King 10 might have jammed the flop. Like 10-9 might have jammed the flop. Like it doesn't.
Maybe.
I mean, yeah, we're playing 1-3 in a 3-bet pot. I don't think you're getting jammed on very often.
It's unlikely I would get jammed on there. I don't think.
Queen Jack would jam the flop.
Yeah, Queen Jack would jam.
The hands that aren't supposed to jam the flop are the ones that jam.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I guess I just feel like it gives villain a lot of one pair and doesn't.
I think so too, but I think it makes those one pair a lot more inelastic.
Right. I think his equity goes up. I mean, like I unblock all the spades, and like he might now have like turn like a pair and a flush draw.
Yeah, you can almost like right. Well, I don't want to say so far as value jam because you just get called by combo draws.
Yeah.
And pair plus draws.
It's funny because so I check.
Yeah.
He checks back.
That's nice.
Right. I'm like, oh, nice. River's an 8.
One liner.
Yeah, one liner now. I check again.
Yeah.
He checks back. And he has ace 8 off.
Yeah.
So I think I would bluff river.
Yeah, I would definitely bluff river.
It's your bottom of range.
I just don't have any 10s, do I? Have 10s, pocket 10s.
Well, that's why you have to have ace 10 suited.
Well, you also are not duty bound to bet big on the river. Like you can bluff
for like third.
Yeah, you can bluff small. You can bluff for a size that you would go with, I don't know, a top 2 that was trying to check jam.
So
the
just
turn
bet
or
like
something.
70.
How much is in the pot?
There's like 200 in the pot. I have 200 behind.
Yeah, you could bet 55.
Yeah.
All you need is for him to fold any one pair hand.
Right.
And if he does that, the bluff is printing.
Right.
Like if he folds ace jack, printing. If he folds king 9, printing. Like you don't need to do anything other than get him to fold a small amount of hands for a pretty cheap price when you have ace king there. If you jam, like, yeah, he might have a tough decision with some hands that don't have a 10, but he's snapping with every 10, obviously. And there's not even really that many hands that are folding to a jam that would not fold to the small bet. So, you know, when you bet small and he has 2 pair or something, then you know, it's whatever, like you just lose. But when you bet small and he has like king jack and he's like, oh, even against quarter pot, I can't call, and he folds, and you pick up the pot for that price, like that's an amazing result.
Honestly,
Yeah, for sure.
the way that a lot of money is going to be made in spots like these is being predatory on the binary mindset of I win or I lose.
Yeah.
Where if you jam, if they have a 10, easy. And sure, sometimes you might get some weird 2 pair to fold. But most of the time, like his 2 pair is going to bet the turn. So he's got 1 pair. And you don't get bluff jammed on.
Yeah.
Right? Part of blocking is like he's supposed to take a king 9 suited or some shit.
And he just has a 10, I just lose quarter pot. Who cares?
Yeah.
And that's huge, right? And then like let's say if you have the 10 in your hand, maybe you go bigger, right? And you're just like, you know what? Like I know that I want to get like call it max value for my hand, and you're not going to be like imbalanced in a node. But at the same time, like we can't pretend that small stakes live is not exploitable by nature in the pool.
Right. And people they see that bet some people just like $50 is a lot because it's just like some people buying for 200 or buying for 100, like it's like half the stack. And so they see like already as a big bet, even though it's a quarter pot bet, and they also see it as a quarter pot bet and it looks like value.
Right.
It's
right?
like
They see it like both ways, you know what I mean? So like it can work in your favor in both those ways.
It's the relationship of gain loss when it comes to seeing money as the vehicle.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh shit, $50, that's food for the week. Or like that's like part of rent money. And it's like, oh shit, in the brain of someone that plays poker and looks at the odds and percentages, you're betting quarter pot. You're getting a really good price to call.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I'm not going to really make as much expected value through a jam because they're going to protect already all their value on the turn because it's double flush draw and it's scary, and I want to win now. Versus I need to protect my range where if I do actually have some good hands, I do need to have some checkbacks. So going for a block versus going for a jam from a bluff sense seems like it makes so much sense.
Yeah. I also just find in a very general sense, like the 4 flush and 4 straight boards, when you're out of position, block sizes on rivers just do really, really well because people aren't like they're not cognizant of how wide they need to defend when they're getting a really good price. So like they can, if they're just as an example, like if you bet quarter pot there, he's probably supposed to call with most of his 1 pair that interacts with the board in some way. Like he's probably supposed to call like a queen, a jack, something like that, because you're supposed to have a lot of bluffs.
Right.
But if he doesn't, then suddenly you just absolutely print. And then the same goes for like 4 flush rivers. Like quite often people are supposed to bluff catch 1 pair with no flush on a 4 flush river against a small size quite a lot. And if they don't, your bluffs just print. So like small size bluffs out of position on rivers is something I do a ton of, particularly in tournaments, because you'd be surprised how much you get away with. And there's lots of spots where like if you just have 7 high and you get king high to fold, that's just a really good outcome.
Yeah, I find the exact opposite happens for me in my game specifically.
Well, you play with rich people. Tournament players are broke.
Yeah, that's fair. I get called wider than minimum defense in a lot of these spots, like where I'm bluffing 5 high on the end for 3rd pot, just trying to get like jack high or king high to fold, and there are no pairs, like just snap.
And maybe in your situation, the player pool you're playing against has been trained to call these small bets. Like when you
maybe especially against
they're
their
just
opponent, right?
they're just very binary, and they're thinking of like small bet equals weak hand, big bet equals.
So like I was trying to think about like this hand, and like I'm like, do I want to play this hand this way? Because this pool, when I play the hand this way, they don't think in terms of range, right? They think in terms of I put you on this hand, I put you on this hand, and what they're going to do is they're going to put me on the most logical hand. And when I bet the flop small and then check the turn,
you have ace king.
Yeah, I have ace king.
Yeah,
and the problem is
you have ace king.
Yeah,
right,
right. So
right.
like,
and the thing is, like, I don't know that you take that line with much else value outside of ace jack.
Yeah, right.
Right, like literally only your ace jack probably takes this bet check line. That's why I think like simplifying the flop strategy works so much better. Like if you have checks, they're on the flop.
Right.
Well, in my opinion, you're simplifying the flop strategy by always betting 20%.
No, you're. I'm saying simplifying the overall strategy. Yeah, you simplified the flop, but you complicated the turn and river tremendously. You have to have a complication at some point. There has to be a split somewhere. You don't just get the range bet 3 times.
No, you don't get the range bet 3 times.
Right. So now it becomes very challenging for us to.
Well, now if you check flop, you have to play maybe a check call node, maybe play a check raise node, right? But if you always range bet 20, you give yourself. You don't give there's no decision for you anymore.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that it's simpler to range bet 20 on the flop. I'm arguing that it becomes very hard to navigate turns and rivers.
Yeah.
Because now you have the exact same problem set on the turn where range bet is no longer available. So now you do have to check. So this whole notion that like we can truncate the tree to where we never have to have a check raise and check call strategy is nonsense. Because at some point on one of the streets, you're going to have to build that out.
Well, the way I see it is it's fundamentally an issue when it comes to the overall 3-bet range as a whole. Because if your only 3-bet range is linear and you only have ace, king, queens plus, you're always going to have this problem set.
No, he won't be that tight though. He won't be.
He thought about flatting pre.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, okay.
No, I didn't. I did not think about flatting pre.
You said it
after the fact.
Hindsight.
In hindsight, I did. In hindsight, I thought like maybe like I was like, can I flat pre here? When in the moment, I was like, this is just a pure 3-bet, like easy.
Yeah,
because it is a pure 3-bet.
Right? Yeah. It was second guessing It was that. You know, when you second guess yourself, it's like, oh, I have kings and I went broke in this tournament. And,
yeah,
how do I play this hand differently, Matt? Right? But like, no,
the thing is, he's just like
everybody can
crazy
be a victim
capped
to that,
when he
right?
checks the turn, and if he starts checking to protect, which he should and will have to, the problem now becomes that like all in again is very challenging. Like if he starts now checking top set of queens on the turn or checking like aces with a heart, these types of hands, now it's just like it becomes very challenging to get stacks in a spot where at 1.5 SPR, I think especially in cash, these are good situations for people to practice polarized strats, right? Like just having a very simple 2-street polarized strategy here with some fraction of your range is pretty easy to build out. And the complement to that is also a 2-street strategy, right? Like when you start with a check, you're effectively still presenting a 2-street strat that can build off into 3. If it goes check check, if it goes check call, that can now become a 3-street strategy because the pot size is going to be, or the SPR is going to be a little bit deeper.
Okay, so what are you checking for value besides top set?
I think you could have like top set, maybe aces with a heart, I think are good checks. I think ace queen with the ace of hearts would be a good check.
You're talking turn
on flop.
or flop? Okay, yeah.
But I mean, it all equates to the same on the turn.
Right.
Like after you bet small and get called, like those are all still going to be the same hands that want to check on the turn. The difference is now the turn's very dynamic, and even your best hands that want to protect your checking range have a desire to bet both for protection and value sake. And that's where it becomes a bit like wonky, right? Like I don't really want to check top set on the turn anymore because he doesn't have a lot of folds.
Well, so now what do you do on the turn?
Well, I would have to check because I need to be checking ace king and I need to be checking tens and I need to be checking a lot of these other hands.
Matt, can you explain why the ace of hearts is important?
It blocks the nut flush draws, so you're just going to face fewer continues in this particular instance. And also, you're kind of already protected by just having that hand, right? So now when a heart peels off on the turn, you still have a high equity hand. You're not that concerned about it going check, check, and him realizing.
So you're saying his calling range is stronger on the flop because you have the ace of hearts, because he's not calling with
if you were to bet.
Right, if you were to bet.
Yeah. It's also, a lot of it is when you have the ace of hearts compared to when you don't, you just there's fewer spots where you have difficulty bluff catching, and there's more spots where you get to play the hand aggressively for value because you just are less worried about running into a flush. So not having the ace of hearts it forces you to slow down a lot when the board runs out of hearts.
I mean, cube blocker, right? Because in this spot, tight ranges is still going to happen more than a normal situation after 6x call, squeeze, big call, fold. That now Ace of Hearts makes it more likely that they have the parts of their range that are indifferent. Where if they have enough flush draw, they're not indifferent. They're seeing all 5 cards.
Yeah.
Where if you do have the Ace of Hearts, it's more likely they have 9s. Along those lines. After continuing facing bet.
I think the most important takeaway from what do I do when I miss the flop is the notion of understanding that even our hands that don't connect with the board have equity attached to them, and there's going to be a ranking system, right? Like even the way that we're going through this exercise here now with Brian's hand, right? We're compartmentalizing different fractions of our range, where we're saying like these hands are really strong because of these properties. They're top set, that just makes it naturally strong, or it's top pair with the nut flush blocker, that makes it naturally strong. It has inherent equity baked in, yada yada yada. The important takeaway is to understand that all ranges will compartmentalize this way. They'll all have these fractions of high equity, mid equity, low equity type of hands, and they're all going to have varying incentives. So really what we want to be able to do is figure out what the incentive of our overall range is, and then what the incentive of our actual holding is, and where is their conflict, right? That's kind of what you ran into on the turn. It's like, well, a lot of my range wants to bet, but this hand doesn't really want to bet.
Right.
So now we've reached a bit of a conflict, right? Now what we just have to understand is that we have 2 conflicting strategies that both have to be executed. It's impossible to go start to finish through a hand without ever range splitting. At some point, you're going to have 2 actions that you have to split your range between,
Most of the time.
right? So it becomes very critical, whether we do that on the flop, turn, or river, to understand how to actually build these splits in a mindful way that doesn't just result in us always check folding our nothing and always check calling our marginal hands. Because that's the fastest recipe to just getting absolutely blitzed and having a massively high loss rate. It's what we're taking advantage of in almost all of these pools. So even those people who are watching that don't necessarily understand how to do this exercise yet, they're still probably slightly better at observing when people around them fall into those camps and applying pressure naturally themselves, right? Oh, Bob checked again on the 7 high board after 3-betting me. He has ace king, and if I bet twice, he'll call fold.
If you want to see this in action, twitch.tv/Landon Tice, September, 30% off. Use probably gonna be live today.
What's our website?
Good plug.
S4Y.io.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe there's a couple courses on there about cbet strategies.
There is a new On Second Thought that dropped this week.
Ewan will tell you all about cbetting through the On Second Thought. You can check out
on here one day.
Yeah, we do. When he's back across the pond, I guess.
He'll be back pretty soon, actually, because he's got to move from his place in the UK and then might be here for a month.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, he'll definitely be here in December, if nothing else. Yeah, be sure to check out a few of the courses on our site. There is a course, many courses by Brocus, but one specifically on targeting that I think will be helpful.
Range splitting, too.
As well as range splitting. I go over a lot of this in the Mid-Stakes Bible.
That's not it. That's Landon's.
That's Landon's Twitch.
There's also a course by 2-Card Confidence on flop textures that I think will be very helpful for
Diagnosing the flop, it's called.
Yeah,
That's
very
right.
good.
So be sure to check out S4Y.io. Check out these courses. Let us know. Leave some love. Let us know in the comments what you think about all of this range splitting, what you do when you miss the flop.
Lord knows we need it.
We want to hear from the audience. Be sure to like, subscribe. We're going to be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. It's an After Dark episode. We're going to get a little rowdy. We'll see you guys all then. Hunt, thank you as always for joining us for Strat Chat Wednesday.
Good to be here.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Goodbye.
Peace.